Usually, if I run these sessions over Zoom, I share control over my screen so that I would get you to participate, but you can't do that on this particular platform. So it's a little less interactive in that sense. If you have questions at any point, feel free to write them down there. You can try also interrupting, kind of like getting in between. I would be happy if you manage to do that. More interactivity is definitely good, but I can't see the pop-ups while I'm sharing my screen, and I can't see you waving your hands, so you will have to use your voice if that's the case. So we'll talk today and share and look at things on what I call contemporary exploratory testing. And kind of diving into that, I need to first explain to you a little bit on what is exploratory testing. So back in the days, before I was even a young tester, I've started 25 years ago, myself as a tester. But back in the days before I was a tester, there was this gentleman, Ken Kainer, who was a test engineering manager in Silicon Valley based companies. And he realized that some of the successful product companies, actually many of them, were doing testing very differently than the descriptions in literature, descriptions in communities that were going around back then, how things were actually happening compared to how the recommendations, so-called recommendations were. Namely, the recommendations were to write test cases, whether that was automated test cases or manual test cases. In those times, that difference was quite much bigger than now in modern times. That doesn't really matter, but it was this exploratory testing as a word was something that he used to describe that we no longer have test cases. It's actually an idea of how we're thinking while we are doing testing, rather than thinking of the test cases as somehow being an intermediate product. So this whole idea of exploratory testing, it was quite different. It was focused on this idea that we don't have endless amount of money to invest into testing, and we need to have really good results. No matter how little money we have, we need the best results out of that money that we're investing. And obviously, since I read this in a book coming from USA, I also looked around myself. I'm in Finland. I'm based in Helsinki. There's already early mentions from 1973 when Finland got the very first computer, started building programs for that. There was this social insurance institution in Finland. I have some colleagues who are working there that I have had these conversations on. This is pretty much the style of testing that we've always had. So I've grown into this. I've done this pretty much my entire life. And sometimes it feels weird how test case oriented some other parts of the world might be. But the idea with exploratory testing, what Ken Kainer described is that you don't want to separate test design and test execution. So if you separate them, you are taking away the possibility of learning between these, and you're taking away the power agency, the power of that person doing testing, making those in the moment decisions where they realize that what I thought I would want to do is something completely different than what I now know I need to do, so that you can have this attitude of, I learned something new, I know better now, I will always be doing better. And that way kind of get to these impactful results, feeling the sense of responsibility over the results that we are producing. So this is the general idea. So in terms of kind of where this exploratory testing then sit with other testing, like we have all these different labels. We talk about feature testing or performance testing or regression testing, and the labels there on red, I took them from a recent talk that I was just listening to, introducing new testing terminology that even I had not heard of at that point. I definitely now know what it is about, but we have these all kinds of mechanisms and new methodologies that are coming around. These are about cloud testing, like how do you approach specific ideas on cloud. So in a way, kind of we have these specific techniques that are some kind of shapes in this weird space of testing, and exploratory testing is kind of, for me, it's the pink area that fills all the gaps that we don't have other name for, but it also is the pink substance that engulfs any of the other shapes So we can use the other shapes within exploratory testing as our constraints or starting ideas, just deciding today I'm going to explore with a focus on security. So in that sense, it's kind of like a wrapper around all the different things. In the modern world, why I added the word contemporary into exploratory testing is that I really feel like we should give up on this whole idea of separating manual and automated testing. Automated testing is just a way of writing documentation, or it's a way of driving your interfaces, whatever level interfaces you have. And when you are using automation to run your tests, you're probably also creating documentation that you can keep for later. So kind of these two things, manual and automated, separating them to different people in the same way as it was a bad idea to do that with test design and test execution before. Now it is actually a bad idea to also do it on the manual and automated front. But I'll show you a little bit more on what this means. Another usual misconception on exploratory testing is that it's somehow, people think of it as it's like it's a cloud here on top of the testing pyramid. But actually it is a cloud hovering over at least half of the pyramid, sometimes 3/4 of the pyramid, depending on how well the intent of the developers is in place, like how well do we understand what we're building. So in a way we could think of it so that we kind of like we have this intent-based testing where we have all the other techniques. We might have unit testing, acceptance testing, and regression testing targeting different kinds of intents. But then when intent and impact are not quite the same, we don't get the quality we want, we don't get the results we were expecting, because some of the parts of these results are implicit and we need to discover them, we need to learn about them. That's what we then call exploratory testing. And then it takes the automation, obviously, then to attended and unattended side. So I would rather not talk about manual and automated testing. I would rather talk about these kind of concepts that your automation might be run in an attended fashion, and you would definitely want to have some that runs in an attended fashion. So the core of things is results. And with results in mind, I wanted to show you a little bit of a demo on what do I mean by contemporary exploratory testing and why do I keep talking about not separating automation. So usually the prime suspect for anything exploratory is an application. And then we're giving kind of like a vague assignment saying, test this. And test this means that there is this invisible paper, you can imagine it as a paper, there's this invisible paper of answer key to all of the bugs, but it's written in invisible ink. And your job as an exploratory tester who is looking at the application is to figure out how to turn that invisible ink into visible. And you have no idea what's written there. You have no direct single tool that will help you turn all of that information visible, but that's what you are set out to do. So it's not a straightforward thing. So you look at the application and you figure out your options. So if you look at this particular application, it's not a very complicated one. It was created by Evil Tester. It's a testing-oriented target, so it's not a production application. And I'd like to remind everyone that we do not test on other people's production. Look for test targets or test environments. Your own production might be a good place to test in if your company is asking for that. But other people's production is not your testing and learning ground, even though it is generally available out there. Testing purposes, I don't think, are the fair use of other people's websites. There's a risk that you break them, and especially security-related things, trying to look for them, you might very easily also go beyond kind of the legislative limits of what you're allowed to do. This one it's a test target. It's called ePrimer, and the name alone, just reading it from this page, already gives me some ideas. The first idea that you probably get is you have no idea what is ePrime and ePrimer. You can then see that there's a text saying kind of you want to write text without using verb to be. Maybe that's a hint. We are avoiding the verb to be. There's some kind of a link, and the link will take us to a web page. I don't want to read this kind of like a Wikipedia as a definition of the domain that we're working on, but just kind of telling that there's more information to this application. And well, obviously I've now with other sessions already read some of that material, and there's still probably more for me to learn about ePrime than just that page alone is showing. But there's a reference, and then there's the application. So for exploring, what we would probably want to start with is just, writing something, seeing that it works. Some people insist on starting with things like emojis. But when we haven't even seen it do anything real, why would we start with something that is not going to be working? That's not good testing. Whether we do it manually or with the help of automation, that wouldn't be a good thing. So we want to first see it kind of like, do the job it's supposed to do, so that we even understand and start learning what the application is about. So we probably want to write some text. We could also leave the text empty. Some people are just saying kind of like to start with the quickest thing and click on the button. But we, again, then might not know what is the right functionality. So we know that we want to avoid the verb to be. So maybe writing the verb to be or some sentence with the verb to be is a good starting point. With this application, when I've tested this with other people, I've come to learn that there's 4 major, what I would call traps into what people fall into when they're trying to spend time testing this application and producing the right results. The first one is that when they click this one and they start reading, hour later, they are still coming up with the test cases and the ideas and structuring from the documentation on what kind of things we could test. That's one of the traps. Another one is that when they write the first text and they run into a bug, yes, there are bugs, even though I chose this particular application as the promise was that there was not supposed to be that many of them. So writing something that discovers a bug, that bug can then become kind of driving you to a certain direction for the entire session. That's a trap I've seen people fall into with this application a lot. Another one is on kind of the different kind of data. So whatever kinds of texts you can write here, trying to write all kinds of texts, going into lists of there's this naughty strings list, for example, trying out different kind of values from that automatically or manually. And then the 4th trap is related to automation. So kind of trying to automate in a too complicated fashion. So here we haven't written anything on the user interface yet. I have just shown it to you. And since we're doing what I call contemporary exploratory testing with automationist gambit, starting and opening our whole exploratory testing with the assumption that automation does exist. I should not have opened that one for you. We have a way of running our web page with an automation script. So we have this starter test here. And just running it, you can see my kind of starting setup, opens the web page and then just quickly closes it. Doesn't do anything other. So with the automationist gambit, within this idea of contemporary exploratory testing, we are exploring, we are not automating. That's what I'm kind of trying to get to here with this demo. We are figuring out how we can put in whatever things we want. So we'd want to fill in some text here. So on our web page, let's say we want to write here to be or not to be, kind of like a usual thing that we would imagine. We want to put in a text field that says that you're supposed to avoid the verb to be. And obviously what we need to know is how do we put that in, well, using the ID input text and our little tool here. So we have this input text and we had our string that we wanted to put in. And whether we want to run this now and see that it works, it's kind of up to us on how often do we want to run this. It already did some testing, but it's so quick that we can't even properly see it. So maybe we can make it slightly slower. We can play with whatever level of patience we have. Changing just the general settings of PyTest. And now we can at least see that the text actually emerged. So we are doing sort of manual testing, but by running scripts, but all of our verifications, anything that we're looking at right now, it definitely isn't yet automated in any way. So we, of course, want to also, click on the thing. I'm guessing submit is not the button that we're looking for. I'm guessing this is probably something different. And it is check for E prime button. Is it allowing me to click on that somehow easily? So let's just copy that along. And instead of submit button, we'd want to click for that check for E prime button. And we have not even seen what happens after this because we insisted on not doing this test manually. So just running our test again, seeing what happens after clicking. So we see that we get those word counts visible there, and we could start verifying those. And to get to these particular values here, we actually do need to inspect these specific things here. So we will need to also do some manual clicking to figure things out. So things are getting intertwined as soon as possible. There's a word count here. There's a discouraged word count, and probably a violations count. Count is then the possible violation count is the third number. So we'd want to get these numbers and do some kind of checks here. Probably we'd want to check that on this page, inner text, inner HTML of whatever that was called. I forgot already, but we're getting to that. Is 4 to be or not to be? 4 doesn't sound like a good thing to have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would sound like a better thing to get to. So just kind of, getting to the numbers. Again, running to see if we are kind of, doing things in the right way. We don't even have to look at the user interface. We could just turn the user interface off if we wanted to for creating of these tests. But when we have that user interface, we have that exploratory testing, kind of like external imagination. The application is sort of speaking to me, and it's giving me hints of what do I want to do next, and having an impact on the learning that I'm doing with the application, which is kind of the essential part of exploratory testing. So kind of, showing you how do I write a line by line thing here. That's really not the point of this demo. And my use of IDE as part of this presentation today is also not the essential part of this demo. So I'll just show you that, we can run from a so-called linear test. So kind of like just getting these different values and making sure that we check them. We can move then from that into a parameterized test. And from a parameterized test, that's when the world is actually open to us in terms of testing. How would we test this? How are we going to try different values? We can try all of them by adding them on the list. So if we felt like testing something like, let's say we test a foo, and we test a, where's my option character? New line, and then we say bar. That actually sounds like a good thing. This is what GitHub Copilot is suggesting me. That I would get this foo bar buzz trio. I would expect that this would give me actually 3 words. There's a foo and a bar and a buzz, and they should be on 3 different lines. So again, how I chose these particular values is because I've explored before. Well, I can see that the first test case there is running, and then the second one is failing. And the second one is failing because it's getting the count of 1 instead of count of 3. So trying the same thing here so that you can really see what's going on. Foo, bar, and buzz. It miscounts. So there's a bug. What would I do in this case? Would I automate it as it's now implemented? Maybe not. I would probably comment it out or leave it there as some kind of a note. Generating the values for this particular example, I'm not going to be spending much of time because I can't interact with you very easily today, but I can show you that I have spent some time on creating these. Just looking at this list here, 9 of these reveal an individual bug. I haven't marked down which one of them are reporting which bug, but exploring this, doing some exploratory testing with automation, doing things quite easily, like, let me just get to the parameterized test. Linear one. Like here, we could, instead of doing this full bar thing, we could just do ABC, and we could say, let's make it a really long one. It's still a single word. We can just kind of, generate our test data quite easily. Rerun our tests. And we can see there was actually one problem there with spaces. There was another problem that wasn't visible on my list. So I don't know if you noticed that, but when we write a lot of different text, it goes over a long text. It goes over this border here. So we would need more checks if we wanted to document that in our automation side. And if we have spaces in it, it becomes too long for the page and the scrolling bar is missing. But I'll actually leave playing with the application as something that you can do further on your own time. So what I wanted to show with that quick demo is that we do produce, as part of our testing, no matter what kind of testing we're doing, we are not just producing automation for regression purposes. We are producing also documentation as some kind of evidence of testing having happened and what kind of things we've checked. And if I can make in the modern world these choices of where do I use my time of generating the evidence, the last thing I would do on my scarce time is write test cases with steps. I would write maybe title cases, test cases, just kind of titles, just to remind me of what kind of areas to explore. And I often do that. I also often do mind maps of kind of like when I learn, how do I structure my learning? Because then it's easy to move things around as I'm discovering the structure. But just as often, I am writing automation as part of this testing that I'm doing. So on this presentation material, I have this kind of like material for you to look at different samples of this application. Here's the answer key of all the bugs you would want to be finding. So there's way more than 9 and 8 of them. So all the red ones are bugs. They are not very good reports, but they should be sufficient if you wanted to spend your own time practicing for you to repeat these. And it's a whole different thing to explore when you know the end results, as if you when you would start with an empty slate, kind of like an empty paper, not knowing anything that you're supposed to have. Probably at the end of testing like something like this, you know the most. With this quick demo, you don't know as much as I have learned, spending more than a single hour on this particular application. I know now what the product is. I can describe it to people coming after me. I have an idea of the key potential risks, and probably me describing the key potential risks and the best ways that I think of on how to evaluate those risks. You would be doing a better job testing if I could give you this. But again, it's an output of me having tested the application rather than an input for someone else starting completely afresh. So it's more of a transfer of knowledge rather than something that you can do as a prep activity. So this is what I call automation is gambit. Test automation is documentation. I also put here kind of like pictures of all of these so that you can have the slides, and just wanted to kind of remind that the process of how to build this is starting from a single line, seeing the single line fail. I actually didn't make it fail today, to having the first test. You need the failure to trust your tools. Having the same test but now with variables, having the same test but now with parameters, making it fail with a bug, maybe getting the entire specification, all the different examples in, guessing the values that are likely to fail. You could run it on multiple browsers, and you've done a lot more testing in a short time frame on this application when you can just go into the configuration and just say, instead of running my tests on Chromium, I'm definitely a Firefox person right now. So running the very same tests, but now with Firefox. I would have things that I haven't even started looking at manually. Limited in what it checks, but it still has a reach and extension to things that otherwise would not be available to me. So why I'm showing this is really this idea that even when exploratory testing, documenting so that we might throw the automation away is relevant. It drives our focus so that we find some bugs, we create some documentation, but we also are more likely to miss some other bugs. So it's not just only doing it this way, but it's kind of like at different hours you take different constraints until you feel like you've done this kind of like a 360 view into your application, and you feel your results are now complete enough. You care for the results. You don't want a results gap that will only be discovered during the production time frame. So you document with automation, you extend your reach, alert to detail, guide to detail, and I believe very heavily that you can't actually automate well without exploring, and you can't explore well without automating. So kind of to conclude, I'm caring for results and resultful testing. I believe that everyone can test, everyone can learn how to test better, and we have a lot to learn on how to test better. Some of the people applying to companies where I work with test automation background have no clue on how to test for results. They know how to write code, and that's not enough for testing. They also need to know how to write code that discovers those problems that are in the product. And other people don't know how to write automation, but they know how to get to those results. I've had business people learn to write basic level automation and start contributing in less than a week doing ensemble testing, so basically learning in a group. And I have an absolutely strong belief that there's no reason why every day we can't come to work and know a little bit more about testing and writing code and caring for our domains and caring for the results. So that's kind of the core point of this contemporary exploratory testing. I want us to get away from this idea. Sometimes we think that whenever we find some bugs, we are already useful, but unfortunately, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And our assignment very often as QA folks is to find something that the others may have missed. And it often is surprising, and the surprises keep us active, and we are never then bored. So that's kind of what I had in terms of presentation. I'd be happy to have conversations and show you whatever else you want to see.
Yeah, thanks, Maaret. First of all, apologies. Something went wrong. I can still want to try, like why I can't share the screen. We have two questions. One is from my side, and one is from Sandeep. And yeah, still I can't share the screen. I don't know what happened. Yeah. So, is anyone have a question? And feel free to raise your hand or just type there. And yeah, just speak by yourself. If not, I just feel, Maaret, when you're giving presentation, this is more like a TDD. First write test and try to fail the fail the test case and then develop? Is more like a TDD approach, or is like once the application is ready, then just a little bit confused with that two things. The same we do with the
So
TDD.
again, I think of TDD as something where we're building our application.
Yeah.
And TDD is only as good as the driver or whoever is kind of controlling the mechanism, like whatever examples you can think of. So in that sense, you're seeing a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
But what you're really seeing is, well, this is a very small application. When you have a bigger application, you have a lot wider world that you need to make your choices on what you start from. And most likely, the little thing that is easy to automate, that will pull you in from an automation perspective or TDD perspective, it's not necessarily the most important thing, providing the most important information in that moment. So over time, you make those daily choices of what are you using your time